the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 men plus the women and children who were with them. I remember a day about 18 years ago now when I was a pastor at Croton United Methodist Church, a little rural congregation, home of the Hartford Fair in Licking County. And my children, Ezra and Sophie, were 5 and 3 back then. And on this particular day, I had a Saturday, had the house clean. I had gotten a coupon for a free turkey from Kroger, and I'd gotten the smallest turkey that you possibly could get because we had a small family and we didn't need it for Thanksgiving. And I decided it had been in the freezer long enough, so I pulled it out, and there was a couple who drove about 30 miles to get to church there, and they just had a baby, and they had an older son who was Ezra's age. And I thought, well, and they always hung around church a long time after. So I thought, well, I'll have dinner for everybody and invite, that family over. So that was kind of my game plan in the morning, although I hadn't told anybody about it. The turkey was in the oven, and after church, people were milling around, and I saw the family at the back, and I couldn't get to them because there were people waiting to talk to me. So I called Ezra over, and I said, now, remember that turkey Mommy's got in the oven? Go ask your friends if they want to come over for lunch. So this is why we need children so much. Every person in that room was their friend. And so I was sitting there talking to someone, and a lady, a neighbor across the street, said, I hear there's turkey at the parsonage for lunch. We just put up some corn yesterday. Do you want me to run home and bring it? And I start calculating in my mind. I had bought a new box of mashed potato flakes, and I knew I had a can of green beans. That was what I was going to do for lunch. And I'm starting thinking, what else is in the cupboard? Oh, yeah, bring your corn. And then, but I didn't know. And by the time I got over to the parsonage next door, there were 29 people there from 3 months old to 85 years old. And they'd already, in true Croton fashion, started fixing everything. And by 45 minutes later, we'd all eaten, and there was one plate of everything in reserve left for my then husband, who hadn't come home yet from work. So I think about that every time I read about the miracle of the 5,000 and these commentators who can't seem to understand how this miracle really could have happened. One of our early church fathers who commented on this passage asked why Jesus did not just use supernatural means to feed everybody who needed to be fed. Why mess with the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish? Why did he use natural and inadequate means at hand to make this miracle work? Chrysostom poses this question and answers it himself. He says that Jesus wants to contradict all despisers of creation who deny that Christ uses created things to do redemptive work. I love that answer. I think Christ uses all kinds of created things to do his redemptive work. And I don't know, honestly, aside from the one woman who asked me if she could bring corn that day, I don't know how 29 people were fed. Now, you may not know about turkeys, but a 12-pound turkey is mostly carcass. And they say it's really only you're supposed to plan 1 pound per person. But literally all of us ate well that day. And I don't know, maybe it was food emerged other than the woman who brought the corn. Maybe there was more in the cupboard than I realized I had. Maybe we were having such a good time together that we didn't really notice that we weren't quite as full as normal. Maybe. But it happened. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think that something similar happened on that day of that feeding of those people who had been blessed by the compassion of Christ already once. Now, commentators on Matthew, one who's very good, I really like, says that in Matthew, there's a kind of difference between the healing miracles and the non-healing miracles, like the feeding of the 5,000. And that the healing miracles tend to happen largely without a whole lot of action on the part of Jesus' official disciples. But that the non-healing miracles, like the feeding of the 5,000, almost always are used as a teaching moment for the disciples. And we would definitely see that in the story that we just heard, because the disciples are actually being surprisingly proactive in their desire to get out of taking care of all of the people who are around them. They come to Jesus and say, it's late in the day, there's too many people here, there's no food, we need to get them out of here so we can get on with it. And Jesus then has a significant little dialogue with them. And I think it's an important message, an important lesson for us today too. I think Jesus was confronting the disciples who were engaged in some serious scarcity thinking. And I want to just say a word about that term. Scarcity thinking is something that's a subject of research right now by behavioral economists and psychologists. Scarcity thinking was first probed by economists who wanted to understand how to make interventions for people in poverty more successful. It was well known in the field that people who live in poverty tend to make some short-term decisions, sometimes engage in behaviors that is self-destructive and makes it harder and harder to get out of poverty, and it becomes a trap. And so some people explain that by going, well, people who are poor have less self-control, people who are poor don't have good habits, and they made it happen, that's why they can't get out of it. But actually, research says something a little bit different. Research says that poverty, being scarce in resources, is quite a bit like being scarce in any other kind of resource, that actually scarcity itself induces a kind of shortage of energy for strategic long-term thinking, and it tends to make people act in ways that are perpetuate the scarcity. So in people who are well-to-do materially, they do experiments and find that people who are short on time or short on a social network can start to behave in ways that perpetuate those conditions. So here's an example I thought was interesting. People tend to think that folks who are lonely have bad social skills. Well, they actually found out, they did this neat thing where they interviewed people who were lonely and people who were not lonely, and they asked them to answer questions into a microphone, and then they rated them. And the people who were lonely and the people who were not lonely both answered them with a comparable level of social skills. But then they asked the people who were lonely and the people who were not lonely to answer questions and told them that someone would be listening to them. So in other words, they had a human audience. And they found then that the people who were lonely scored significantly worse when they imagined there was an audience that they were speaking to. Because people who are lonely start to focus a lot on themselves and on trying to please other people, and actually we know that's probably one of the least positive ways to make significant connections with people. So that was just one example, but in a lot of other kinds of resources, there is emerging a pattern of people engaging in scarcity thinking. So forgetting long-term priorities, focusing on getting through the immediate crisis. The disciples were engaging in scarcity thinking. They felt scarce on material resources, with 5 fish, or 2 fish and 5 loaves. There were 13 of them just in their little group. They probably thought they were already a little short just amongst themselves. They were feeling short on time. It was getting late. And amazingly, in the midst of that big crowd, they saw themselves as different than everyone else and thought, really, that it was their problem alone. And so Jesus called them out on it. He refocused them because in their tunneling way of thinking about just getting through the situation, they'd forgotten the compassion that Jesus demonstrated to the crowd just earlier that day. And he did that in a very simple way. Ordered them, bring me what you have. Bring me what you have. He didn't just say to them, okay, go ahead and pass out what you've got. Bring me what you have, and then he lifted it up to God. He gave what they gave him to God. Gave thanks for it. Dedicated it to God's purposes. And then asked them to be part of sharing it. Now, I don't know. I'm thinking that there were probably people there that day who also had some food on them, who saw that happen. Maybe that was part of what happened in the miracle. I don't know. But I know that there's a huge difference in the way a community operates when it focuses on God's abundance as compared to when it focuses on our lack. And I think our society right now really needs the church to be proclaiming and living God's abundance, because I think our political systems, our rhetoric in public life is full of scarcity thinking, and it's profoundly ungracious. I think you can probably think of examples of that, and I'll let you do that on your own. But the church is always called to be bold in proclaiming God's gracious, abundant giving when we offer what we have to God for God's compassionate purposes. There's always more than we think we have, and enough for what is needed. Amen.